It's 4 p.m. I will call this meeting of the Executive Committee to order. We are all here. This meeting was posted appropriately by the clerk's office to all the local media outlets. We'll rise for a moment of silent prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The minutes of October 16th were in your packet. Does anyone have any corrections? There being none, we'll record them as posted. So, Treasurer Quarterly Report. There's your speaker.
As you can see, there's not much on the plate other than making out tax bills right now. But the RFP for banking services is underway, and it's a monumental task, if to say the least. So we will be looking at a couple other counties who have done them in most recent past, and Waukesha being one of them, and see if we can piggyback on some of their. Everybody does it different, but we'll see if we can piggyback on that. And I talked with Bill yesterday quite extensively, and it is a big task to take on. Not only that, if we would decide to go with someone else, it's a 2-year window that we'd have 2 sets of books by the time everything clears and things get transferred. And we had a little taste of that with the sale of Samaritan, so we're getting better at those types of things. So if there isn't any questions, that's really all I have.
I hesitate to ask this, but given all that complication, is there any possibility that our current bank changes their rates a little bit, knowing that we're going out for RFP?
Yeah, that's what's been done in the past. I think from the time it was Farmers and Merchants to M&I to all the others that BMO has acquired along the way and we've been with, that is really what has happened in the past, is that they went to the state bank, if you will. The U.S. Bank has those rates, and they matched those rates, so we just extended that contract. So those are all things that cost-wise we're going to look at in this preliminary idea until about March 1st, and we should be able to figure that out, if it's even worth to go out to RFP or if there's other things that can come forward, because there's a lot of IT things and all kinds of other things with ACHs and electronic and all of those things. Not saying that the smaller banks or any of the banks in the area could not do this, but it's the changeover, and that's why that 2-year window. So,
okay.
I can see Margie cringing behind me. So.
Supervisor Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seem to recall, probably early in my tenure on the county board, that we had a discussion of this. It had to be 5-6 years ago at least. So what kind of term, or is there a term that's being considered for this? Like, are we talking 5-10-year term for this contract? Or?
No, in conversations with the county executive, the way that we'd like to see the rotation, if you will, would come in the middle of every term. So in other words, I just completed a 4-year term. 2 years from now, we would be looking again, kind of thing, and then 4 years from there, so that a new treasurer coming in would have 2 years before they'd have to make another switch. Granted, we were banking before online banking with the company we're with now, so to change online to online probably wouldn't take that 2-year window, but that's the buffer that we're looking at. So it would be try to do a 4-year upgrade every time, or a 4-year extension, if you will. So a 4-year window is really what we're looking at.
And then I guess probably more for Aaron, what, I'm assuming that for us to change would require a lot of costs to move it. So at what point do you have it in your mind that there's a percentage or some type of amount where it actually makes it feasible if we're considering talking every 4 years? Because I got to assume, you're going to have to, it's going to take a while to even recoup to break even. So.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be necessarily that we would change every 4 years, but that 4-year window is what we would look at to reevaluate pricing wise. And we do that now on an annual basis, but we haven't come forward and said, let's put the screws to it or whatever you want to call it. So,
But potentially you could.
Absolutely we could.
I mean,
Yeah.
I guess.
In my
what I would like to see is just that we kind of at least nail down an idea of the costs involved.
In my 4 years, we've done twice that where we called our current banker in and said, here's what we need, and they've matched that. So
And hopefully that'll be the case.
yeah, and it's not like there's not a ton out there because we do use PMA for our investments. So the investments taken out of there, it's basically a day-to-day checking and depository. So that's really what we're looking for. And that's not as lucrative as others if there was investments in that.
Right, but still there's associated
There's still,
costs.
oh, absolutely. But I mean, as far as profitability for the supplier.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Thank you. Our next item is the GIS quarterly report.
Good afternoon. I'd like to wish everybody a happy GIS Day. I appreciate you guys scheduling your meeting on GIS Day.
Is that in the calendar? I missed that.
It is the 25th anniversary of GIS Day. That part's not a joke. So
Wasn't in my iPhone.
it's usually the Wednesday of Geography Awareness Week, which is what we are also in. So you can impress your families over dinner with that tonight, I'm sure.
Or not.
Or not. I'll leave that part up to you. On the EOS report, just a few items of note. For NextGen 911, we are again showing the data remediation of being off track. It's just turning out to be significantly more time-sucked than what we had originally thought it was going to be. The good news is that we were successful in getting a Department of Military Affairs NextGen 911 GIS grant that you had approved, I think, the last county board ago. So we were successful in getting that grant. So we'll be able to bring somebody in to help us with that work, and we will be reworking this goal when we get that person in-house and put some realistic timelines to complete that important work. The 2024 orthophotography project, we actually took initial delivery of that today, and it has already come in handy as I was helping the clerk from the town of Hartford today, some voter registration concerns that they had getting the voting day registrations all entered into the WisVote system. So I'm glad to have that in-house. We use that data set every day, and so do our municipalities. The last thing I wanted to specifically point out is that the land information plan is essentially complete. The Land Information Council will be meeting tomorrow to formally approve it, and then we'll submit it to the state, completing that planning process. And we'll be presenting it as a discussion item or a consent item to the Land Use and Planning Committee at their meeting next month. So that's what I have. If there's any questions on the report, I'm happy to take them at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I forget what you could, it begins with O, I don't know, ornithology, whatever.
Orthophotography, yep.
Yeah, that's one. Okay. That's what's used to determine the flood zones, correct?
So this is aerial photography taken straight down. It's kind of the base of a lot of the maps that we take. We're now on a 2-year update cycle. It's a project that's coordinated by the Regional Planning Commission. What's used to determine the flood zone is actually the LiDAR data.
Okay.
And that's a three-dimensional surface of the Earth. So that will be flying new next year.
Next year, and that was my question, because I recently was looking at that and the data sets, with the way Washington County is growing.
Yep.
And it just so happens that I know some people that are living right next to the river, and then some data sets are saying that they're in a flood zone, and some are saying that they are not. And yet the data sets are older than their houses, so you can't really determine it, and I'm just trying to give them an idea of when we might see actual newer, more updated data sets.
So the challenge is that we will be flying LiDAR next spring, and we will have an updated surface of the Earth that is current and extremely accurate. That's an input to the actual floodplain mapping process, whereby if FEMA doesn't go through a mapping update, you're not going to see the floodplain maps automatically update. Like, they would have to go through a process and actually take the flood elevation. I mean, there's a couple different ways that they can do it. The first way is that you take the existing known flood elevations and you apply that to the new model of the Earth to create where that flood plain line would be on the map. That is the cheaper of the options. The more expensive of the option is that they would redo all of the engineering work to determine the new floodplain elevation and do all new modeling. And some of that was recently done. So we would have to look specifically in the areas that you're interested in to see exactly when that last study was done by us, by DNR, or any of the contractors that we have to determine when that was updated. And you will be seeing at the county board sometime probably in the first half of next year a floodplain update that will
Yeah, I don't wanna
update
get,
floodplains for a good chunk of the county.
Get too far off track with it,
Yep.
that may or may not be germane to what we're seeing here, but thank you for
Yeah,
the
you're welcome.
info.
Any other questions or discussion? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next item on the agenda is the county clerk quarterly report.
So as of right now, we only have one of our initiatives that we're still working through, which is the election integrity package. We have our audit coming up in December. Second week in December is when we're planning to have our countywide audit, which will be the presidential contest and then the U.S. Senate contest. But otherwise, our other initiatives that we've been working through, the I Voted sticker was a huge success. So that was used in November and then will be used next spring too. And then we're planning to have another contest for the next general election year, which would be 2026. And then our quarterly Saturdays have been a huge positive impact on the community. Our first Saturday that we had 22 appointments. So we had 3 staff members working. And then our last quarterly Saturday, we had 15. And so that's within a 3-hour time period on the Saturday that we offered. And so the last time we had 2 staff members working. And so definitely a great benefit to our community and for those outside of the county that have come to Washington County to get those services on a Saturday. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions or discussion? Thank you.
And just to let you know, I will be bringing forward a full update on our entire election integrity package, likely in January.
Okay. Our next item is simply a discussion item. We had talked a while back about forming a committee or task force to study our site, maybe this building, but maybe the whole, like had been talked about developing all the way from Manitou all the way up to the West Bend Company. I know there have been conversations as recently as this week with the school district about the future of Fair Park School, so it all plays in, but I just want to talk about it and see what everybody thinks. I know that the county executive has some input, so I guess What I'd like to cover is, first of all, either or. A committee would be county board members, probably based on this committee mostly. A task force would include citizens outside. So we need to talk through what we want to do with respect to that. What are the goals? What would be the charge of such a committee? What's the timing? I mean, why now? Most of us might not be on the board in 5 years when any of this comes to pass. And then who would be on that board? So as the county executive leads us in a little bit of a discussion, let's all be thinking about what we feel about this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you'll recall from the presentation that we had a month or so ago, we have some very rough sketches of potential for the property, particularly south of Highway 33. We have versions that are also simply just sketches, just one step up from a thumbnail for everything, as the chairman just indicated. I think the question that this committee ought to wrestle with is twofold. First, everything that we talk about as regard to the totality of Manitou to Regalware is opportunity that has impact well beyond the boundaries of county government specific. It's much bigger than that. It even goes beyond the city limits, of course. But separate from that, but in conjunction, I believe this is where, for example, next generation housing, which ideally would take up much of that development or redevelopment, kind of crosses with your master planning for this campus, for the footprint of how county government operates. What do we do at the public agency center? And so that's really the nexus, I think, of the conversation that the chairman and I had in particular. Certainly the future of how do you utilize the existing facilities, potentially new facilities, is the bailiwick of the board, of your committee in particular. Once you expand the conversation to the much larger discussion, that's when we started kind of debating whether there's a task force involved. I think where we left things largely was that bigger discussion probably ought to be in the form of a task force. What that looks like exactly, I think, is something that can be discussed. I'm a firm believer, and we had a conversation, Lonnie and I, with Superintendent Wimmer, subsequent to the approval of their referendum. The timeline now is firmed up for when Fair Park School will close. I believe they should be a player that is at the table for what the redevelopment of that property looks like, not just because that's their property, but based on the numbers that we talked about from that sketch alone, you're talking about the potential of hundreds of new families in West Bend and frankly, potentially thousands of new students in their school district, which would create a different problem from the current problem that they have, which is a good problem. So I believe they need to be somebody who's sitting at the table. We intend to have a very preliminary conversation with the superintendent and the school board president, giving them a preview of what you saw in public session not too long ago, and maybe a glimpse under the hood of a little bit more than that. The other entity that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't have a seat at the table would be the city of West Bend. Any approvals, any designs, zoning changes, subdivision codes, comprehensive plan changes that have to happen are going to have to go through the city. I think having an elected official from the city in particular, as well as an administrative appointed official, more than likely the planner would be the logical person. Having them sitting at the table at the same time would make a lot of sense too. Saying all that, I also believe it's important for this group, whether it's a subcommittee of that larger task force or whether it's completely separate altogether, if you choose to have executive committee run it or an ad hoc committee, there has to be a very specific question about what happens with the building we're in, what happens with the PAC, how do those two things dovetail. There should definitely be overlap between task force and ad hoc committee or your committee, but they're separate and yet together. So that was the conversation the chairman and I had, certainly not trying to predetermine any outcomes, but I feel strongly this is the type of thing very much like some of the major decisions we've made in the last 10 years, where the more stakeholders you have at the table at the beginning of the process who are informed step by step, the more the seamless it will operate as we start to see it come into fruition. Initially, I think I've told you in the past, I thought the master plan would be something maybe more than 5 years out, 10 years out. I think a number of things, the approval that you gave last week as a county board for essentially preliminary approval for borrowing money to do the reconstruction here with the constitutional officers, that extremely expedites phase one. The Fair Park School closure, I think, is another additive, if you will, more fuel on the fire that will accelerate this process. And then I think the faster we start to have public conversations about the south side of 33, I think that really has the potential to be another accelerant, and this could go from what I thought would be maybe a 10-year plus plan to maybe a 5-year or less plan. So I think now is the time, to the chairman's point, for you to start to make decisions, not just on the I dotting and T crossing on this phase one project with starting with the constitutional officer move and so forth. But then what does phase two look like? How fast does phase two happen? And then what does that look like in conjunction with the rest of the community? So I'm a large advocate of your master planning for campus, county government campus proper, staying within the realm of your board, whatever that looks like. I'm also an advocate of let's have a much larger group in tandem with that group on the bigger picture from Regal Place to Manitou, as the chairman illuminated. So happy to answer any questions. Again, certainly no predispositions as to how it should end, but I think it is a conversation that's appropriate and happy to be part of it.
Discussion. Supervisor Kelling.
This might be for you, Mr. Chairman, or this might be for Josh. I mean, as we roll through this master plan, are we considering more of a piece effect, breaking it up into portions, or are we looking more as get it completed by a certain date type of thing? How do you perceive us moving forward on this?
Well, for the sake of conversation, let's do this one thing. Let's talk about master plan. When we use the term master plan, let's focus on county government buildings. And we'll talk. Let's just use the term community development when we talk about all the rest of it, just for our own conversation. When we discuss master plan, in essence, we've already broken it up into phases, but almost by default. Really, quite frankly, it was financial that drove that. So you are now officially in the process. The little warning I gave at the end of the discussion for the budget repair resolution, where if you're approving this and you don't borrow the money, you are overtaxing people, if you recall, that was telling you, I was trying to be as clear as I could to be telling you, you are doing phase one and you've just approved borrowing money. So what that will allow you to do to set the stage, the way that we're going to structure this debt, it was allow you to do this phase one. All the constitutional officers move towards the east end of the building, towards the secure entrance. A number of the departments, mostly that report to your committee, begin to move over to this government center, the current second floor where constitutional officers currently are located. And then you're left with only about 2/3 of the PAC full. Okay, so just over half of that building is full. That's where you start to get in, okay, is it phase two, or is there a phase two and a phase three? There's all kinds of questions that we could literally spend hours talking about. Where do each individual piece go? Just as one example, the federal government has the USDA offices over there. What do we do with them? And then, of course, we've got economic support, the VA's office, the ADRC, so on and so forth. So this is why you need a committee, because you can get down into the weeds. It will be phases. The question is it 1, 2, 3, or 4 phases, I believe. And then that's why it works in tandem with the larger community development conversation, because now you're talking about starting to put property back on the tax roll. How fast can that generate revenue to help offset the cost, if you will, for the move? Okay, so that's all a long way of saying what you approved the other night gives you, number one, the full principal and interest payment to make that first move that we just talked about, and it allows for a large portion of the principal and interest payment for a second move, which likely includes a new construction of some sort. We don't have enough room on existing footprint. So you've definitely got 2 phases. It could be more, and you have a hell of a downswing, principal and interest, without raising taxes with the move that you just approved last week. So I believe this is the group that's got to kind of think through, okay, do we want to try to bite it all off in a second phase? Would we prefer to do step 2, step 3, so we can chew a little bit and swallow? There's pros and cons to both. And we're already starting to have the conversations about, well, we said we were going to borrow $5 million. Maybe you want to think about $7 million, because when the wall's open, change the electrical then. Don't wait to do it until later, that type of a thing. So excuse me. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's complicated answer because it's a complicated question.
No, and I get it, because I guess for my point of view, we got rid of Annex 2, we got rid of Samaritan as far as it's not part of
Campus,
our plan
yep.
anymore. We are looking at the PAC. That building is approaching, 40, 50 years old?
Nope, 25.
25? Okay.
25, 30.
But the
we're at
building
point
has
where
issues.
We're
Yes.
going to start seeing air conditioning, roofing, windows.
Oh, yeah, we're there.
We're at a lot of different
Yes.
costs associated with that.
Yes.
Like we had with Samaritan. So, and then you also have Fair Park, the possibility of that closing. Have you gotten any kind of timeline on that, by the way?
Fair Park closure?
Yeah.
Fair Park school closure? I believe the referendum stated it's got 2 school years left, if I remember correctly. So it would be 26, 27, I think. It's either 26, 27, or 27, 28.
Weren't we looking at possibly a public agency building on that site?
Not on that particular site. I believe different iterations of the master plan had additions to this building to the east or southeast.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you remember
Yep.
if you think of the campus from an aerial photography, anybody's interested in that kind of thing, happy birthday to your profession. If you think about it from an aerial view, if we were flying a drone over, the county owns everything from where you're sitting east all the way to Rolf's Road. So we have a heck of a lot of property in that direction, and basically everything from here to the old Schmidt Road, that all has the potential to be filled in. New human services, expansion of the jail. I think at one point there was contemplation of an administrative wing that direction. So everything was always thought to go east.
I mean, because it's just my thought that we're coming into the second phase where you're going to be, I'd like to see everything on the south side of 33 gone, like off the county. When we talked about this in the past, I said, there's a lot of land that we own there, and quite frankly, 33 is somewhat of a barrier for how we work together, and how we efficiently work together, and having the PAC over on this side of 33, I think would certainly improve our efficiency and our flow. And if we're getting to a point where we're talking about a lot of costs associated with the current building, it might be time to kind of start pushing that a little quicker.
And
I agree with your underfunding.
And a consideration is we're lucky nobody's gotten hit by a car crossing that street for all the traffic. So Supervisor Schultheis.
Thank you. I'm not familiar with how the government works in a scenario like this at such a high scale. From the corporate world, I guess we would look at an executive summary of sorts, just kind of a high level, some of the things you just brought up. This is what this would look like if we did phase 1 and then phase 2. This is what it would look like if we did all phases at one time. Again, high level executive summary. So then this discussion won't get into the weeds tonight as far as, I'd like to see this or I'd like to see that. Keep it at a high level with some of the exact things you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's the conversation we're having right now is, does this group want to do that discussion? Do you want to have an ad hoc committee do that discussion? And then what happens with we want to put things south of 33 on the tax roll? Who has that discussion? Is it this group? Is it the task force? I think the chairman and I are on the same page. I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but I think it's a both and. Where do you draw the line? That's really up to you guys.
Excuse me.
So we're blessed to have two people in construction at this table, and neither one of them has spoken yet, so.
No, you had your hand up first.
So I appreciate your point with regard to the executive summary, but really, we are the executive committee. To delegate that to the county executive, I think, is unfair. So it really is our issue to wrestle with. Now, that being said, having been in other boards where you walk in 5 years down the road and they say, well, no, we decided that 10 years ago, this is how it's going to be. Well, it doesn't make sense anymore. But everybody's been doing it because, well, that's what the group said at that point. So as far as doing everything in 2 phases, I think is quite presumptive to say that we're going to know now what absolutely should happen. Can we set a vision? Yes. But too often, I think future boards' hands are tied by poor decisions that current boards make, and I would not want to do that to somebody else. That being said, as we go forward, I think it's important that we do get community input from the stakeholders, but it's my opinion that with regard to the closing of the UW Washington County campus, there were individuals on the task force that really didn't understand what the parameters were that they were dealing with. They thought that it would be easy. Well, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do that. Whether or not it was possible, they didn't really have the understanding of what they could do within the existing laws. And so I think it's important that whoever we get involved is informed enough or becomes informed enough during the process that A, we don't make bad decisions for the future, B, we split it up so we're doing things in a timely way, and C, people understand what's actually possible and legal at any given point.
And as we found out last week, it's important to all of us to stay within our means.
Yep.
Supervisor Shadron?
Yeah, that's always the goal, right? Live within our means. I guess I would like to know, since we brought this up for discussion, when would you like the committee to start? I mean, could the executive committee take it on? And if we do, would we have to do it in ad hoc meetings outside of the executive committee meeting?
Yeah, I mean, it's 4:34 now. Not
And
quite.
we're on item 3.
Yeah, I'm not
Started
quite
at
kidding.
4:35.
Yeah. No, so I think the having this group begin to work through, and Scott and his team have already begun the process for that phase 1. I think if some of you were on the committee when the remodeling of this room was happening, I think having some level of involvement and continual reporting and updating from Scott, which I thought was very, very helpful. Sometimes it gets tedious, but I think that it's the type of thing that, as the vice chair pointed out, like, that's your function. You don't want me doing that, and quite honestly, I don't want to be doing that. So I do think that needs to begin post-haste, even beginning next month already, having some of those, or January at the latest, having some of those conversations. To get back to the phase 2, phase 3, again, initially I thought this was going to take longer. I really am starting to think this could happen relatively quickly. I realize you guys have re-elections that you'll stare down the barrel of about a year from now. But in that next term, I mean, I think legitimately you could be looking at and talking about on the next construction project. I mean, we've absolutely set the stage financially for you to do it. It's completely within reach. The bigger question is going to be, do we bite the whole apple and try to swallow it in one fell swoop, or do we slice it up into pieces and try to take it a little at a time? And I think there's going to be pros and cons to both, and it probably is going to come down to how much extra principal and interest are we willing to tax for. That's, I think, really going to be the gist of your discussion. Once you kick it over to this other group potentially, they will help answer some of the questions of what's possible and what's legal. Especially, that's the importance, in my opinion, of having the city in the loop on in the game at the table. And I would anticipate if you start now with phase one, this isn't going to end for this committee, if that's what you're all suggesting. This isn't going to end for this committee for probably the next 3 or 4 years on the short end. It's possible it's 5 or 10. It just is a continual, it continues going until everything's built out. Now, from the government side, from the government corporation side, it's very possible it's done in 3 or 4 years. Very possible. But so for that reason alone, I think my recommendation is you start now. We'll be coming to you in, I think we just talked about January for the borrowing resolutions, which means by February, I think they're. So final approvals of that debt will be in March, which means stuff is going to start moving. You'll physically start seeing moves happening, construction happening. I mean, better than anybody. That means you're talking about them now.
Well, I wouldn't mind throwing my hat in the ring with my background in construction to be on that committee. I just don't know what that looks like yet, and where we're going to start.
Yeah. Well, you'll have an insider's view that nobody even else on this committee will have by working with Scott so closely. But I think, as demonstrated with the reconstruction of this room, it won't be quite so executive summary level, but it also isn't going to be rolling out the blueprints every month and why are we putting that wall there instead of over here? It's a nice medium.
Start, like you said, with the overview.
Yeah.
What do you want to tackle, and then, like you say, piece it together.
And I don't mean to undersell phase one. What Scott has drawn up with the architects for phase one is a chunk. I mean, it's a very big move for us. I mean, you're essentially shifting the whole flow and function of how all these buildings work. We're essentially flipping it. It's going to take a lot of coordination and all of that stuff on the construction side, especially the two of you can appreciate. But then the citizen, the customer side, we're going to have people pounding on that door. I promised you for years trying to get in. It's going to be locked. So this is going to take time. I'm quite certain in 15 years somebody's going to be knocking on that door for a death certificate or something.
It'll probably be me.
We'll have to set it. Yeah.
And, hey, I'm used to coming in over here.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Right?
It's just shot. It's just shot
Supervisor
again. No
Schulteis.
big deal.
Okay.
Thank you. So I don't have purview to what the agenda looks like for this committee in December, but is it a quiet time? Do we actually get started looking at the high level in December? Is it part of an executive committee, or is it a separate special executive?
That's exactly what we were debating and wanted you to discuss.
I'm almost thinking that should be separate, because that might take some time. There's going to be a lot of back and forth and feedback and brainstorming,
The
and
agenda is.
you could spend hours on that one
We
topic.
kick it off, like you said, Mike.
one at a time. This committee has the executive, running the county
Sure.
things, and we have administrative. So I don't think we want to tackle that in our meetings, but I do feel that this body is the one that should do it. we'll just have separate meetings.
And that's exactly where I was going to go, Mr. Chairman. I think this committee should certainly be the root of the advisory committee, and that I do believe we should have West Bend. We should have the school district. I think that makes a lot of sense. Not sure if there's somebody else I'm not thinking of, or we're not thinking
Right.
of, but I think that's something we should definitely talk over. But I would like to see it happen in January, starting at the beginning of the next year.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Mr. Chairman? So, just to give you an illustration of what specifically what we're asking you to answer. So, in years past, and this is before me, and nothing is before Scott Schmidt and Eric Damcott, but this is before my time. When they would do projects, the county board would set up a separate ad hoc committee. So you would take people especially who have expertise. So, somebody like John, somebody like Brian Krebs, maybe somebody like Ken McCulloch, that think around construction and have different viewpoints. And that body would then make recommendations back up through committee and to the board. That's one way to do this. You could, delegate down to a subcommittee of sorts or an ad hoc committee. And an alternative approach is this body is that body, because everything that Supervisor Schwab mentioned a few moments ago. You could also, in that format, basically send everything to Supervisor Shadrin as committee chair, and he and Scott could kind of work out some of the finer details, and then come somewhere between executive summary and finer details to this group. That's another alternative. I'm sure there's 1,000 more ways you could do it, but those are probably the two closest to the two ways we've done it in the last 20 years.
But I think we're talking two different things. You were talking about the land around us and including the city.
That's right.
I think
and that's
the
a third
first
discussion.
Right.
Yeah, the first committee, or whatever we want to call it, deals with our property and our building here and the moves within, phase one, if you will. And then we do probably need to have a separate task force, or whatever you want to call it,
For 2 and 3.
and to go beyond this property,
Yes.
the other.
Yeah, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, if we're starting off with one, then I kind of agree with the first vice chairman. I think we're fully equipped right here. I also worked in construction for quite a while with my brother, so yeah, we get it. I've done these types of things in my job plenty of times, so it's. I think for phase one portion, yeah, we're good. As we start to branch out to phase 2 and all the rest of that, I think we bring in, and we do it separately from this meeting.
Right.
Which I'm not big on more meetings, but I think this is important enough.
Absolutely.
We'll do that.
So, Mike?
As we're looking at this, it's easy for us to start thinking in terms of what building's going to go where, and who, what's going to be, who needs to be involved, and all those which are really details. If we are unclear upon the principles that we're discussing these things, we're going to make mistakes. And so I think we need to spend a good amount of time at the beginning figuring out what areas are open to us, how much do we really need, what are our priorities? Is it a priority of government that we have a lot of land, or is it a priority of government that we operate as efficiently as possible? Because once we decide those guiding principles, we'll be able to figure out, it'll make deciding what to do with each individual parcel that much easier. And so I would just caution us as we go forward to spend a legitimate amount of time figuring that out. Einstein said if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes figuring out the problem and then 5 minutes solving the problem, right? And it's kind of the same thing. We really do need to figure out what our guiding principles and priorities are, so that as we plan for the next 500 years of Washington County, we're doing it on a well-informed basis with the long-term needs of the county in mind.
And I would point out, one of the things in that principled conversation has to be the quality of what you build. Because what we've learned from the last several projects is garbage in, garbage out. It's a real deal, and there's no better representation than the Public Agency Center. So it might cost you an extra 25% to have, the higher grade, whatever, but 30 years later, you look back and you go, boy, I wish I would have spent the extra 25 then, because that 25% of 9 million is a hell of a lot cheaper than 75% of 30 million. But that is a principled discussion too. I always say there's conservative and there's cheap.
Supervisor Shadron.
If I can add to that, think about the bones of this building and how old it is, and we've remodeled it a dozen times.
Yes,
It still fits the needs, it's still standing.
yes. And that clearly was a different philosophy in 1960 when they built this compared to the 1990s when they built that.
Yes.
This roof doesn't leak.
Or yeah.
By many components to why that doesn't happen, but.
But right, the roofs and the tuck pointing and the windows and the HVAC
Yes.
and
Materials.
yeah, exactly.
So, but that's, like I said, those are the in the weeds discussions we can have.
They are. But to Supervisor Schwab's point, you set out from the start, we want this grade of quality. It takes out that most of the conversation, honestly. Well, then here's what you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can we do it cheaper? Well, yes, but our principle was.
Right.
So what have we decided?
In my opinion, thank you for your indulgence. We decided to start in January with this committee to include other parties as needed in a separate meeting, because
Right.
theoretically, we have enough to do in the regular work of the executive committee that this is important enough to set aside a separate meeting. Now, which day of the month that is, or 2 days of the month as it may develop, I'm not certain.
We can have Kayla do a doodle pool or whatever and reach a time that works for everyone.
How often do we want to meet? I don't want to get, I don't want to slow down any potential project, but on the other hand,
I think your initial conversation in January and knowing how Scott operates, John and Scott will have already done some of that preliminary, and certainly we will have, and the Chairman and I are in constant communication. I think you'll have a pretty good idea once you hit January. It'll probably, like all projects, it'll be fast and then slow.
Evergreen.
I think we might have to, at least start with one a month, but it might have to be twice a month, but it all depends on when your final goal of having a final answer is.
Exactly. You two will talk and come in January and go, you know what, it's once a month, and then you get to the second one and you go, you know what, maybe we should do it twice a month for a while, and then wind it back down. I mean, you all have the flexibility, especially with Kayla, to be able to be a little bit nimble.
And these will not be public meetings, so we don't have to notice them and
Oh
all
yeah.
that?
Oh no, they're public meetings.
We do. Okay.
Oh yeah, they're public meetings.
What about
They're-
actually looking at a date and time for January to
Um,
close out the discussion?
We have business to conduct tonight, so let's kind of,
Wrap this up.
yeah, Kayla can take care of that.
Okay, I was just gonna.
The only other question I would have, and if I'm jumping the gun, I apologize, but what I'm hearing, if I'm hearing this correctly, we broke this into two segments, the master plan and the community development component. We've addressed the master plan from what I'm hearing you say. The community development component, if I'm hearing you correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, the chairman and I can go back to the drawing board on a task force, and we can work together on our normal procedure for developing a task force, but it's going to be a combination, so to speak, of this group and community members, including the city and the school district.
Yes.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we need to establish what our needs are first before we know what's going to be left over for community development. Mm-hmm. Right?
Like Mr. Trump says, let's take care of us
Us
first.
first. Yes. Right?
maybe
Step one.
Washington County first.
Yeah. Well, we have to. We need to know how, okay, what are we developing for?
Yeah.
How far are we going to go? How much land do we need?
And to that point, we can, in the meantime, we can come back in December and give you a thumbnail on what do we need and how will that work, and maybe by then, this is what we maybe not the names, but here's a thumbnail of what the seats are for the task force.
Good. Any further discussion? Thank you for your input, sir.
Thank you for including me.
Next up is use of ARPA for multiple items. This is a committee report from the executive.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is a committee report. I'm actually we have a design there for you, so to speak. There have been a number of developments actually in the last 48 hours that have me potentially making some significant changes to that. So with your permission, I'll kick it to December. We have to make decisions by December. It has to be allocated. But I will take the grace of that extra month and come back to you with a little bit more clarity on where those dollars are going to be allocated.
I would motion to postpone to December.
Well, it's not a motion, so I don't think we need to do that.
Need motion on that? Perfect.
Yeah, we'll come back next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. Our next item is voiding stale checks.
A real barn burner after what you've
And
just
for
discussed.
that, we need a motion and a second,
I'm
correct?
at the edge of my seat.
Motion by Supervisor Schwab, second by Supervisor Shadron.
Just want to see and make sure my name's not on here before we vote them.
Did that already. My neighbors is on there.
I saw some for the village of Germantown. I was surprised.
We've discussed with all of the people on this and actually reissued some checks. So this will take care of us through the year 2022 and make those all current.
So, not to take a lot of time, but why do we have all these voided checks?
Well, these are stale checks. So these are checks that people have not cashed. Most of them are, I shouldn't say most of them are jury duty. And I believe they're either lost in somebody's car on the way home or they haven't, they think they're donating it back if they don't take the money.
Okay. I saw some rather large ones for Germantown.
Most of those have been taken out since the last draft. So
Okay.
we were at
Oh, yeah.
about $8,000. Now we're at 27. So
Okay, any discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Our next item is the resolution authorizing Washington County GIS. Hey, it's Geography Month. To provide service to Hartford. Supervisor Schultheis makes the motion, second by Supervisor Kelly.
So this is the second in what will likely be a series of shared service agreements related to GIS with the approval that you gave to the city of West Bend at your last county board meeting. This is providing the same service for the city of Hartford. So happy to answer any questions, but we're excited and definitely looking forward to rolling out GIS services to any community who's willing to partner with us.
So the obvious question is, with West Bend, we had kind of arrangement that filled the position or paid for the position. At what point here do you need another person to do this extra work?
So we have plans to hire an additional person for the GIS department already. We will definitely be able to take on City of West Bend and City of Hartford with that person. The City of Hartford's GIS footprint is significantly smaller than the City of West Bend's, only because I think that it's just a newer program there. It's just not as evolved as the City of West Bend. As we roll it out, it definitely could grow, and we'll have that conversation when it occurs. But I would think that, we're good for a while. We're able to add on the small towns and the simple requests that we've been getting recently. It's only if we would get everybody on and their current use of GIS would grows substantially, that's when we need to start talking again. But I'm definitely comfortable taking on the municipalities that we are already working on with our existing staff of 3 plus the one that we'll be adding.
Okay. And so you're saying that GIS is the type of thing that as you start to use it and you get comfortable with it, you find other uses and it kind of snowballs?
So hopefully what we're doing actually makes the municipalities more efficient in what they do. So if we're able to, put a system in the hands of the person who is in the field installing the sign or doing the road work or the utility work or whatever, if we're able to put an application in their hand that they're able to collect the information out in the field, it makes them more efficient. The information that they have is more efficient. But it takes staff time on our part to actually create that application for them. So you're seeing an increase in staff on the back end to create those systems, but then hopefully it makes all of the front line more efficient in what they do, and also gives the managers and the electeds and everything more information to make wise decisions.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Our next item is use of strategic priorities funds for library services cost increases. Is this you?
I'll move approval.
Motion by Supervisor Schwab, second by Supervisor Schulteis. Do we have any questions?
I can just provide a quick update. It's the annual contract amount that you all approve with the Exhibit A that we attach to the contract. Everything in it is based upon the library services contract that we have with all of our libraries here in Washington County regarding their funding. And I believe we're using the strategic priorities to fund the increase over what we had originally budgeted with the biennium budget.
And that increase is $33,442, correct?
Correct.
Further discussion? There being none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Next up is Hart Homestead Measures of Success Dashboards. This is simply a discussion and presentation.
Good afternoon. Yep, so the first item is just information only, just an update on the dashboard for Next Generation Housing as well as Hart and Homestead. And I did want to point out that we reached our maximum applications for the Hart and Homestead on this round over the weekend. So the portal was shut down, but we do have a wait list that people can sign on to, so we can track those individuals that might be interested in future incentives. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on the dashboards.
Questions? Supervisor Schwab.
I don't really have any questions, but I like the way it's laid out. It's just a really good, quick way of seeing the progress that's been made. And good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agreed.
Thank you. Next up is a Housing Framework Toolbox.
Yeah, so we don't have any framework changes for this month. It's really just information about two different tools in the Next Gen Housing Toolbox. The first one I want to talk about is the permit fee. We had $600,000 allocated to the permit fee incentive, and that has been with the approval of a further agenda item coming up here next, that would be completely depleted. And we talked about the idea of why have a separate fund for just the permit fees. So each development that comes forward requesting funds can be considered for the $20,000 as well as the $6,000, and any of those funds would be coming from the general Next Gen Housing pot of money versus having a separate pot of money just set aside for the permit fees. The second item that I wanted to point out, and this is a big thank you to the EDWC staff. They worked with their board and got the Impact Revolving Loan Fund approved to be utilized for next generation housing. So a segment of the Impact Revolving Loan Fund will now be able to be used for developments, for infrastructure, et cetera, if it's a development with next generation housing as a part of it. So this is very exciting news, and it can certainly be utilized and stacked with our $20,000 incentive as well as our $6,000 permit fee incentive. So a new direction, great for our toolbox, and the EDWC staff is now working with the Revolving Loan Fund Committee and working through all of the details and policies for that. And once that is resolved and the details worked through, then we'll be including that information into the framework.
Questions or discussion? There being none, we will move on to the Next Generation Housing Fund request by A&N for Partridge Hollow. This is, we don't need a motion, this is simply
These would be
report.
motions.
Okay.
Yes.
So, motion and a second, please. Supervisor Kelling, Supervisor Shadron.
And I have questions.
Okay. So there's actually two requests from A&N Contracting. They are our builder that is working on the Skyway Park development in the city of Hartford already. They are looking to expand their business into more of a developer role and building, which is very exciting. And they are requesting funds for 16 new next-generation homes in the Partridge Hollow subdivision. This is an existing subdivision that has 3 out of the 4 phases completed. Their work would be on that 4th phase. They anticipate that the infrastructure and construction, even though there's 26 lots, 16 of those lots would be next-generation homes. So they're requesting $320,000 for those 16 lots. That's at $20,000 per owner occupied. And the additional request is for the $96,000 for the permit fee incentive. It is the same project, but 2 different requests. I wanted to point out on the screening checklist that number 10 and number 11 are both yeses. And I also wanted to point out that at this time, we are waiting on the city of Hartford to provide some additional information for EDWC to complete the ROI impact analysis. Typically, when we have a request for infrastructure construction, I have EDWC run an impact analysis for that project that has not been completed. So I would request that on this agenda item and the next agenda item that you could condition the approval on a positive ROI impact analysis once that is done. They are anticipating closing on December 19th, so that is coming up pretty quick. And I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Supervisor Kelling.
I would note that both items K and L, Mr. Chairman, contain the same attachment. Can you tell me why that would be?
Right. I actually noticed that prior to the committee, and I talked with the county clerk, and they were able to switch out that agenda item.
I'm still seeing the same attachment, and it's hard to make a decision when I don't have the proper information. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm just,
It's the same properties, is that what you're saying?
It is the exact same project, and what they're trying to do is stack the funding, so it would be $20,000 per owner occupied, and then the $6,000 for the permit fee incentive.
That's why it's the same property, but
Yes, there was two separate reports that were provided.
And I did not receive one of those
Oh.
reports. And this is the thing, I don't like, and I will say, for future reference, I don't like to see this kind of stuff happen this way. If I don't get the information and I make the wrong vote, I don't get to tell the taxpayers, well, I didn't have the right information.
Right.
Okay, they kicked my butt out of office. So
Of course,
I am not
yes.
thrilled
Of
with
course,
this
and
situation.
both reports were provided.
And then the question 11, 10 and 11, I saw that as two. That was one of my other questions, why those weren't answered, why I didn't have that available already.
Yes, 10 and 11 were questions that they had just overlooked, and when we received that information from the builder, we double-check it to make sure that they have checked everything. We reached out to them, and so we do know that number 10 and number 11 are both yeses.
I would state that, normally I'm a very accommodating man. I understand things happen. But there is a way that things need to be done. And I would
agree.
expect that it's done better.
so basically the first request is for 20,000 per house to put in the street and the infrastructure.
Yes. It
Sewer
will,
and
it
water,
will
et
most
cetera.
likely be used for land acquisition, but infrastructure construction is an eligible use as well. And then the 6,000 is for the permit fee, and that will be sent directly to the city of Hartford.
It's an offset from the costs that they would otherwise have.
Correct.
Okay. Do we have further discussion or questions? Supervisor Schwab.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not opposed to passing the motion as presented, given the information that's provided on record, which clarifies items 10 and 11. I do have a concern about the motion as presented does not include the phraseology appropriate for pending financial consideration or financial review by EDWC. So at some point, we either need to defeat this motion and start with a different one, or amend this motion to include that language.
Yeah, I concur that we should, put a qualifier on there that, subject to confirmation.
Yeah, and that is something that we that your committee has done in the past. So it does take a bit to prepare those ROI impact analysis.
Is there a timeline on those? How soon do we expect them?
I anticipate probably within the next week. So I can certainly come back at the December meeting and provide that information to you.
Okay.
I would agree with Supervisor Schwab. I just don't like doing it this way. I feel like we don't have the right information. We're not, you put the horse in front of the cart. And, I don't feel that that's what's happened in this case. And I don't like having to be under a deadline because that, forces me to make a bad decision or a reckless decision. This is just not the way to do things.
Nobody wants to make a decision without all the information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I don't necessarily want to stop this. I would like to see it proceed forward. But I think with extreme caution that this type of stuff is just not going to be tolerated in the future.
I agree.
We're trying to find it.
it looks like it's in there. I'm looking at.
I'm seeing, I just checked, both of them are exactly the same on my attachments for both K and L.
Really? I just downloaded the one for the permit
I don't, what are
separately.
you looking at, Dennis? Are you looking at?
For the attachments for K and L,
Where are you looking at the packet?
Yeah.
attachments that are
No, where
Are you on
getting to it? How are you getting to the packet?
through Prime Gov.
You're online now.
Yeah.
Can you go to L? L on this side?
Yeah. So this is
And I mean, this wouldn't be a Deb issue, this would be an us. So I mean, don't.
see these?
Yeah.
Go back
to Prime Gov.
Now watch. Now here's. Same one.
So here's what I'm seeing when I go to L. There's a 6K permit fee incentive is there.
That's what I got, the 6K and
Yeah.
K is a different one.
Yeah, I'm seeing two different ones, so I don't know what.
I got it on Prime Gov, that's where I'm going through.
We'll take a brief recess to get this straightened out. We're approving money to come out of the Next Generation Housing Fund, which was ARPA money. So this doesn't go to the full board, it just goes to us. So, are we willing to do a friendly amendment to add that subject to satisfying the ROI requirements?
I'd be okay with that.
I would consult with our attorney just to make sure that we're okay on that.
Yeah, he said that.
As long as you're all in agreement, we'll call that a friendly amendment.
Then I would be amenable to that.
Okay, so we have to pass the amendment first?
No,
Can you please repeat what you're for us?
What's
To include language,
Yeah, that the approval is subject to the ROI, EDWC ROI figures
Being positive.
being positive. Any further discussion? So this is item K we're dealing with first. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Now, for item L, we would add the same friendly amendment. Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah.
I would move
Yeah.
approval of agenda item 3L as presented with the addition of the phrase "subject to a positive report from EDWC on the ROI."
Second that.
Second by Supervisor Schultheis. You get the motion in second? Schwab and Schultheis? Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. And the next item is M. Next Generation Housing Fund request by City of West Bend for housing study. I'll make the motion. And second by Supervisor Kelling. Before we get too far then, was this all approved by the Next Generation Housing Committee already?
Correct, yes. We had our meeting yesterday.
Should have pointed that out earlier. I'm sorry.
Yeah. My apologies, I should have pointed it out, yeah.
So do we have any questions on this one?
Just one, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question to make sure this is consistent with our program goals.
It is consistent with our program goals. Yes, the City of West Bend is interested in doing the housing study to take a look at, single-family duplex, townhomes, condominiums that, kind of line with that workforce housing. This is a very similar study that the fund approved for not only the City of Hartford, but also the Village of Germantown. And in this instance, it would be specific to the City of West Bend.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, in that being the case, I would definitely support this issue.
Did I take a motion in a second?
You did it.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Any further discussion? It's getting late. There being none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Brownfields County Assessment Fund request for Regal Place LLC.
Yep.
All right, good evening, everybody. Oh, sorry.
I'll move approval.
Motion by Supervisor Schwab, second by Supervisor Shadron.
Okay, good to go. Okay, so before you today, we have a funding request for Regal Place LLC for $18,600. This is for supplemental soil assessment work related to, basically it would be 5 more soil borings on the site for 10 more samples. And then additional confirmation sampling work related to asphalt and just confirmation that asphalt on the site while they're doing construction activities. But that total was $18,600, and then the match from Regal Place will be $3,720, and then 80% coming from the site redevelopment program will be $14,880. And with that, I can take any questions. Oh, and this was approved by the Site Redevelopment Committee.
Thank you.
Was it last week?
Supervisor Shadron.
Thank you. I just have one quick question. Is there a reason why they need additional soil samples?
Yes, so the Wisconsin DNR came back and requested additional soil samples related to PFAS that was on the site. So they just want to confirm that detection and kind of the distribution. They want to make sure it's a small area versus the entire site or something like that. Okay. So, yep.
Thank you.
Is this the one where the standard changed in the middle of the road here?
Yes. So the standard changed by, I think it was like 200,000 times. They increased the PFAS standard for like the threshold that the DNR considers. So it went from being a non-issue to an issue underneath our feet. So now we're pivoting to accommodate that. So, yep.
Okay. Supervisor Kelly.
And I guess that's where my confusion is, and maybe you can clear this up for me. It says the SRC will meet on November 13th to consider funding supplemental assessment work. Today's the 20th, and it seems like.
Right, yeah. The initial language was, I drafted the report when it was before the SRC meeting, so the language was for prior to. So the SRC has reviewed it, and they have, and just because we're trying to get these reports to the clerk ahead of time, about 2 weeks we try to shoot for, so the language definitely was a little confusing. I saw that.
And
yeah.
there, again, we update the clerk. Okay,
Yep.
because when I get stuff like this and it confuses me, I can't make a good decision.
Right.
And so, please let's clean up how we do things.
Agreed. This one was kind of two ships passing in the
Yeah,
night
and-
with
and-
the timing, so.
Yeah, I totally, once you had explained it, I got it, but
Yeah.
it was one of those things, I don't know that when I'm sitting there reading the agenda and trying to make a decision.
Yes. Any further discussion?
This report says it.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right. Our next meeting will be December 18th, Wednesday at 4 p.m. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. This meeting's adjourned.